Hi there, folks. My name is Josh Buck. I'm the Executive Director Curator of the Clarke Historical Museum. Thank you very much for coming down tonight. I'm very pleased to introduce this program put on by Keat, Icons of the North Coast and America. When Katie Whiteside first came to me and approached me about this project, it was very clear that this is right in line with the Clarke Museum's mission, which is to celebrate the rich and varied history of Northwestern California by preserving, sharing, and interpreting that history in ways that increase knowledge, engage the mind, enrich the spirit, and stimulate the imagination. I don't think that you could have asked for a better panel of experts that are here with us tonight, all of whom will be introduced in due time. I did want to also start out with a land acknowledgement that we are on the traditional homeland of the Wiyot people. The Wiyot people called Humboldt Bay Wiki. They called Eureka Jeruji. And I would just want to acknowledge that despite actions taken by local, state, and federal government, that the Wiyot people have persevered, still here, living here in our community today. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Clarke Museum, too. This wing of the museum was built in 1979 as Neelis Hall, and it was built to preserve and share the rich history of the Pacific Northwest tribes, especially Humboldt County. The Wiyot, the Mattole, the Yurok, the Karuk, many, many more. Everything that you see in this room makes up what is one of the largest collections of Pacific Northwest Native American basketry and regalia on the West Coast. I highly encourage you to come back to the museum. When you're here tonight, check out some of the exhibits, because here pretty soon we're going to be rotating. Here on September 1st, you can join us here again for a members-only preview evening if you are a member of the Clarke Museum. If you're not a member, I highly encourage you to join. It not only gets you free admission, but invitations to members-only preview evenings.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and hello to our viewers at home who are going to be viewing this later this week. And again, a big thanks to the Clarke Museum for hosting us, and our wonderful Keat team behind the camera. Can we give them a round of applause? So my name is Linda Stansberry. I'll be your moderator tonight, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our panelists. Beginning on my left, Julie Clarke has been a park ranger for the Bureau of Land Management since 1999. She works at the Headwaters Forest Reserve and is the author of 2 local books, Falk, Lumber Company Town of the American West, and The Lighthouses of Humboldt County. Patti Fleschner is director of the Trinidad Museum Society and historian for the Trinidad Civic Club with a master's degree in history. She is also an Ollie and Historical Society presenter on 18th century Spanish voyages and landings in the Pacific Northwest. Susan Pritchard O'Hara is originally from Southern Humboldt, a graduate of South Fork High, who went on to receive her Bachelor of Arts in both History and Anthropology from UC Santa Cruz, and her Master of Arts in History from UC Santa Barbara. She currently teaches history and English at Casterland High in Southern Humboldt. She has written 10 books on local history and recently collaborated on a 100-year history of the Fortuna Rodeo.
Thank you. It's a big book.
And finally, Justin Legge is a certified California naturalist, certified forest and nature therapy guide, and a certified interpretive guide, along with many other credentials. He is the current restoration manager for Friends of the Dunes, and his work has been featured in several national and international publications, including National Geographic and the Los Angeles Times. So again, thank you all for joining us, and I'm just going to open up with a general question, which is, what symbol or icon do you think best represents our region? And I'm going to ask this of each of you, and I think I'll start with Justin.
Oh boy, oh wow. Well, overall, of course, the The symbol I feel represents our region is our giant redwood trees, Sequoia sempervirens, as a species and forest overall. And if I had to be really, really picky, I would choose an interesting one, which is at Humboldt Redwoods, the Greek-French bell grove, known as the girdled tree. So what really stands out to me about the conservation of this area and the forest is, at least philosophically, the ability of this area to overcome adversity and hardships. And I don't think they necessarily knew that tree would survive when they removed most of its bark. It's a very interesting symbol. So I really love to go to that grove for forest therapy experiences, because you can actually touch a tree that was massively damaged by us for the idea of promoting the area, protecting the redwoods, getting people excited about the forest. So I find it really interesting how history has changed, and we wouldn't consider doing that to one of our titan trees today, to remove the bark 30 feet up its trunk and then bring it to San Francisco to get other people excited. So I think it's a wonderful beginning to the conversation of changing thoughts throughout history.
I am already loving this program. Okay, now to you, Susan.
I also find the redwood to be a great symbol for Humboldt County, and kind of taking another twist on it from going back over 150 years to how the struggles of those early loggers, what they had to overcome. And then fast forward to the struggles then of the Save the Redwoods League to preserve the trees. And it's all really connected about how the railroads and the roads were being built, which allowed then there to be the transportation for the logging in that southern Humboldt or northern Humboldt region to be accessed by the mills, and at the same time allow those first members of the Save the Redwoods League to come to Humboldt County and see the damage that was being done and actively work to protect them. And again, like was mentioned, this idea of how things change and how that impression and understanding of the redwoods change from being the red gold of the 1880s and 90s to being this symbol of peace and tranquility and of state parks and preservation. This is an ongoing growth of the understanding of the redwood tree. I'd also say, from another angle, because I'm a teacher too, so I always see things from multiple sides, is the Eel River itself, because it winds through most of southern Humboldt to just south of here. And with the floods in 1955 and 64, those were such big moments for people who lived here at the time that people hearken back to that as, well, where were you in 64? And what did you do in 64? And where were you living? And those kinds of things. And of course, this also affects those who lived along the Klamath and any of the rivers actually in Northern California and Southern Oregon. I'll go for a third one, is Humboldt Bay. And that is because Humboldt Bay, when it was first discovered, we have various options of when Euro-Americans found it. And of course, it was important to the Wyatt and the natives who lived in the area. And Humboldt Bay itself then became the center for that early Euro settlement. And of course, the first explorers that came to Humboldt County wouldn't have been able to survive if it hadn't been for the help of the Wyatts when they first came. So I've tussled with this question on my commute to work every morning, trying to decide, and I've narrowed it to 3, okay?
Wonderful. On to you, Patti. What do you think represents Humboldt County or our region at large?
Well, I think lighthouses in general, but particularly since I'm a Trinidadian, I'm very partial to our 1871 built Trinidad Head Lighthouse on the southwest corner of Trinidad Head, built after many shipwrecks on the north coast. And I think the lighthouse keepers who lived up at the Trinidad Head Lighthouse for years, starting in 1871, are representative of a independent spirit and strength and commitment to civic virtue and safety and tenacity and everything we admire in humans. It took a lot of tenacity for these men, mostly men, but lots of lighthouse keepers' wives were extremely helpful in the lighthouses. Many families were raised up on Trinidad Head. So the Trinidad Head Lighthouse, and then its partner, it's an approximate replica, is the Trinidad Memorial Lighthouse, which was built in Trinidad when the U.S. Coast Guard decommissioned some of the precious navigational aids, the fourth order Fresnel lens, the oil lantern that was first placed in the Trinidad Head Lighthouse, and then the 2-ton bronze fog bell that was ensconced in the Trinidad Head Bell House starting in 1898. So we first had the lighthouse, of course, and then with the fog being an issue in San Francisco, this beautiful bell was made in a foundry and brought up in 1898 and installed about 125 feet above sea level on Trinidad. So they're two iconic structures that remind me of tenacity, safety, and preservation, historical preservation. And they were built, or the head lighthouse was built because our Pacific Northwest coast is so rugged and so dangerous, where actually the European contact with the Yurok people in Trinidad Bay didn't occur till 1775. That's pretty late in the discovery exploration period that we're used to in European history. And mainly we weren't discovered, probably because of fog. No, but maybe other voyagers could not see through the mist and the fog. And the other thing was our rocks on the coast. So those lighthouses. But the other precious thing to me are naturally the redwoods, but I think the William Carson gingerbread mansion built a few blocks away from here in 1885 is representative of Eureka in wonderful ways too.
Thank you. I'm surprised, although maybe we'll get to it, that so far no one has mentioned the fog as an icon of Humboldt County. I mean, if you live here, for one thing, you know it. So finally, Julie, what about you? What do you think?
So Justin mentioned that the Sequoia sempervirens, that's the Latin name for our redwoods, and I'm not sure if a lot of you know what that Latin name means, but sempervirens is ever living. So the tenacity of the redwood tree that was logged so many years for where I work in Headwaters in the town of Falk, I've just seen so much regeneration since 1884 when they were logged. That those trees are still alive and that the redwoods are so resilient to disease and pest and even the hands of people. And when people come to visit those old growth redwood trees, and I've been with them, they all of a sudden get very, very quiet inside, and they look up at those trees. The average tree in the United States is 40 to 60 feet tall. And our coastal redwoods are the tallest in the world, almost at 370, up to 380 feet high. And so at a deep cellular level, I see people calm down into their DNA and see not only the tenacity, but also the resiliency and the timelessness that those redwood trees bring. And to me, this area is very timelessness, and that Patti was talking about, just the relatively not too far distant past of our European explorers in 1775. So you see a lot of untouched area in Humboldt that'll bring you that timelessness quality that I noticed growing up in Southern California, where you have strip malls everywhere. And then, the timelessness of Old Town, of course, and just that feeling of that, being able to go through different times in that way, and resiliency. So that's what I would bring to mind when I think of our icons and the Sequoia sempervirens.
Thank you. So I'd like to redirect really quickly back to the clips that we watched. So David Rubenstein, he talks about the Statue of Liberty. Why do you think, this is for the whole group, why do you think the Statue of Liberty has endured as kind of this symbol of America? And why do you think that it's become such a subject of political debate for the last, however long, how many hundred years we've had it? It's been a subject of debate. What do you guys think about that?
I think that part of it is that it is related to the amount of people whose families came through New York and had that immigration experience. Because one of your questions was, what would people see when they came to Humboldt County, and what would they recognize as one of their, moments of like this Ellis Island? And it would, again, depend on when you came to Humboldt County. If you came between 1850 and 1913, it was after 1890, it was the Humboldt Bay jetties. And before that, of course, it was just the roughest entrance on the Humboldt, or on the Pacific North Coast between here and Columbia. One ship, or the Columbia River, rather, one shipmaster one time said that he felt that there was maybe rougher waters around the Cape of Good Hope. Maybe. And some of the wives of the people who, the officers at Fort Humboldt, talked about how afraid they were crossing the bar and seeing all these bones of the dead ships around the entrance. It was a very hazardous entrance, and a lot of people swore up and down they weren't ever going to go on the ocean again because of that rough entrance. For others, it would have been then after 1914 when we had the railroad, and they would have come through where I teach now in southeastern Humboldt County, and they would have been very slow to see the redwoods because most of the area that they would have traveled along would have been already logged or about to be logged. One of the tragedies that I see is Sonoma Flats was just south of where Dyerville Grove is, and it was completely logged in the 1916s, and it was a stunning grove apparently. Anyway, so then if you came more recently, of course it's going to be that you came in through the redwoods. So there is that attachment of coming in that story, that power of that story. The other thing that I see is that symbols are powerful, and they mean different things to different people, and they're not static. That's one of the things that we chatted about earlier, that things can't, your perspective and what you know about something, it can change. It can also, it's something that people can rivet to. That, oh yes, here is this statue that represents liberty and freedom, and so this means something, and I can use it for whatever argument I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I found it really interesting how the gentleman mentioned that, it didn't necessarily come with this is the meaning of the Statue of Liberty when it was first installed. So we all, as we interact with each other and sort of project our emotions and beliefs onto each other, and when I look folks in the eyes, we sort of like to assume that we understand each other and perceive each other. When we look, I feel folks come to see our redwoods, and they might symbolize them with different feelings. And the same way with the Statue of Liberty, such a famous object, people project their own feelings onto it. And then when they come into a conversation with another human being, if they don't have a level of openness and the other human being shares maybe their interpretation of the symbol, then they can get in some heated debates. So unfortunately, just like the Redwood Forest here and so many other things in life, it doesn't come with a wonderful guidebook of this is exactly what it means and this is how we should interpret it and this is how the conversation should go. And I think that's also what's great about our culture and us as human beings, is that if we can remain respectful and open-minded, we can have conversations and we don't all necessarily have to agree, and we can change meanings of symbols throughout time. So I think it's very interesting.
I think it was wonderful that Mr. Rubenstein and his park ranger companion pointed out, that mostly when visitors or pre-COVID, at the Statue of Liberty, that you heard languages from all over the world, so that it still is a beacon of liberty and freedom and hope to people around the world. And of course, the 19th century immigrants had no idea probably what they were going to find here, but they viewed it for hope and opportunity and a better life. And it seems that the "send me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, and send these the homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." That was a junior high school choir song. And it resonated for this junior high school student. Even with our troubles on the southern border now, the symbol as of liberty and freedom, I think, endures. And it's true that I think we can all interpret it in a way, and that's a wonderful thing about it. I also think it's a marvelous tribute to our relationship with France, and the Marquis de Lafayette is very big help with George Washington during our Revolutionary War. I think that it's a fitting tribute to remember that France was our great ally.
Yeah, I have a great story about sort of community that happened in New York City with my husband a couple years ago. We were visiting the Statue of Liberty, and he remarked, "Oh, I can't believe how small it is when you look at it really closely." And so we were in the visitor center, and there's this sort of display where you could get up and kind of stand in front of a camera, and then your photo would be projected onto a tree with everyone else's photo that's in the visitor center. So you got this really nice sense of community and trees and just like the growth that comes out of our country. And there was a family in front of us, and they clearly looked like South Asian, Malaysian. And there was a grandmother, a parent, two parents, and their baby. And we were waiting for our turn to take our picture, my husband and I. And they held the baby up to the camera. And my husband, who's like kind of a stoic man, I mean, it makes me almost cry thinking about it. He said, "There it is. That's what it's about, Julie." And the weirdest thing happened. Like 2 days later, we were waiting in line for a bus, and they were right with us, the same family in New York City. And so, here's that, I mean, millions of people in New York City, like 2 days later, and here's community happening right in front of our eyes. And so, of course, I asked him, "Were you at the Statue of Liberty Visitor Center with your, I'm sure that was you." And they said, "Oh, yeah, we were just there the other day." And so I verified, but, it's like, okay, it all came together at that moment, and what the Statue of Liberty means, like real life. It's really special.
Wow.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that is really lovely. So, you're talking about Stone Mountain. So the meaning, the intent of symbols, the names that we give to memorials, to symbols, all of those things can change. Their interpretation can change. Our interpretation of history can change. Here in Humboldt County, we've had a reckoning with some of our symbols, including the McKinley statue. Recently, the state renamed several place names, many place names, I should say, across California because they contain what is a slur against Native American women. So all of you have a role in one way or another helping people interpret history and interpret symbols. And I'm wondering, how do you marry that conversation of both honoring history and then also honoring our current our current knowledge of what's appropriate?
I think it's by emphasizing our common ground and our common humanity, and trying to bring out the positive in relationships here, and particularly with regard to the lighthouse where Kiwalata, the Waiat chief who greeted the Gregg Party in 1849. His daughter was Josephine Beach. She married Charles Beach. That's Josephine was the daughter of Kiwalata, and the common ground that occurred with this family was that Charles and Josephine's Beach's son married Maud Harrington, who was the daughter of the second lighthouse keeper at Trinidad Head. So there was Wyatt and the Trinidad area from Big Lagoon to Little River areas. Generally, the Trinidad part is considered mostly Yurok territory, but the Josephine apparently was a survivor because it was foggy.
Yep, exactly.
From that horrible Woodley Island massacre. And yet the family interconnected with the Lighthouse family. And in our Memorial Lighthouse Memorial Wall, we have descendants of some of the people who lived in the Churai village in Trinidad. They're commemorated there, as long as, of course, many people of European descent. In our Trinidad Museum, our largest, it's about a 2,500 square foot museum, 5 rooms. Our largest room is like our beautiful Nellis Hall here at the Clarke. It's our largest display room, and we love showing the exquisite basketry and the implements, the regalia that these incredibly talented weavers and makers of implements have. So we show that, like we here too, you just can't have anything but admiration for the people who are able to create this, their tremendous creativity and closeness with harmony in their area and their love of their area. So I think emphasizing our commonality that, next to our Native American room with its beautiful dresses. And, we have the beautiful redwood canoe constructed by one of our first charter members of our Trinidad Museum Society was Axel Lindgren Jr., a 5th generation descendant of the Churai village. And that Yurok canoe, something like the one that we have in this room, he carved it and dedicated it to the museum, and was on our board of directors, and having him tell his tales about his heritage and his friendships with his classmates at Trinidad School, same with his sisters and some of his children. I think our common humanity and understanding helps to guide us through everything.
Yeah, I would agree. When I was researching a little bit about Stone Mountain, 90% of the people that live in that area are African American. So it's not very inclusive when you really think about the big picture of that monument and what it says to the actual people that live there. So you take away a sort of this relevancy to the population and disenfranchise. So to have that inclusivity, I think, is just really key. And especially when I'm doing interpretive programs or when I do interpretation, we want to do a project actually with the WIAT out at the South Spit and really talk about the creation of Humboldt Bay, that WIAT message, the indigenous message, and that they're still very much a part of that area, and then really work with them on all the stories and things like that, so that people can really be inspired by it and really know that story as well. Instead of, and there's some really interesting 1850 Humboldt Bay stories about discovering the bay and things like that. But yeah, just incorporating all of us together and not disenfranchising a population, I think, is really key.
That's what comes to my mind as well, is I think as if a symbol that's not necessarily extremely historic, the Stone Mountain was done in the late 60s. If a symbol is extremely hurtful to a certain population and they're expressing this, I think that takes a lot of energy and power to make those statements. It's a lot easier as people of privilege to speak loudly, and I I think it's important to hear the pain from certain people and respect that to the extreme, especially with something like a symbol that, and to go back to what the man said in the clip as well, we need to fully understand the history, not erasing the history, but the symbol is not necessarily the history of the story. And if we can ease pain by doing such, I think that has a lot of value.
I also agree with making sure that the full story is known. Where I teach, again, I teach at Casterland, which is roughly halfway between Blocksburg and Alder Point. So I'm in southeastern Humboldt County. The Native Americans who lived there were the Nongadal. They are an extinct group of people because they were one of the groups that was rounded up, put onto the reservations, where they then died from the smallpox-infected blankets and such that were passed out. They were either sent to Hoopa, which was again way out of their where they lived, or they were sent to Kovlo. And if you're aware of the story of Kovlo, there was a gentleman there who wanted to go by the name of Colonel White, and he enslaved the Native Americans and the Wailaki in particular, but also some of these members of the Nongadal. They also did that to the Sinkyone tribes, was also eradicated from around where I grew up in Wiyot. And I think it's really important that we recognize who these people were, what they did, how they lived, and not just say that it was. So I have to give a specific example. Where the river comes together at Dyerville is where the southernmost point where this dugout canoe was used. And recently, the state parks had a canoe carving event at Richardson's Grove. I have nothing against carving a redwood into a log. I just wanted to make sure that they explained that this was not what was used in that section of the river, mostly because you've erased now the Sinkyone, and I want their story to be known. And yes, we have Sinkyone Wilderness now, but they were a different group of people. They were the Shelter Cove Sinkyone. The ones who lived along Bull Creek and around the Wiyot area were the Lolancock Sinkyone, and their story needs to be told as well. I also have to give a caveat. I wasn't around when Wiyot was named Wiyot. Its original name was McKee's Mill, but there was also a post office somewhere else in California by the name of McKee's Mill. So they had a competition, and they came up with the name Wiyot because one of the little girls in town thought it was a Native American word meaning by the river. So, and at that time, Wiyot was by the river. That was pre-55. It was around 1926 that it actually became Wiyot. So, and again, that's a corruption, and one I'm not pleased about, but there it is. So again, how things are changed and understood over time is something that we all have to come to grips with. And as a history teacher, one of the things that I really take inside is that I need to make sure that my students, I hate history books. I have to be really blunt about it, but history textbooks are the worst. And I want them to know the real history. I want them to read primary sources. I want them to really dig into it and get into that tells you the real story, because it's the story of people, and it's the story of connections, and it's the story of how we figured out how to live in this place, how to make a living. And it's kind of a fun thing to talk about and to celebrate wherever you are.
Thank you. We're coming up towards the end of our time, believe it or not. So I do have one more question. So this is related to the Golden Gate Bridge. So many Humboldt County residents were troubled by the news that Fern Bridge may have to be rebuilt or replaced after the December 2022 earthquake. There's been some temporary repairs, but it looks like there is further work to be done. So, and we don't know how much that's going to cost. So Do you believe, as was suggested by the caretaker of the Golden Gate Bridge, that some symbols are Mustangs that must be maintained no matter how much it costs? And is it a different story when we're talking about public infrastructure that's maintained by public dollars?
I want to chime in and just say this reminds me so much of the conversation I feel about forest management across North America. So I feel like there's like so many variables, and there's a lot of specific. Where are you? What happened here? What's the time frame? I'll just be the guy, and I'll just say I don't think it's worth it overall to save the bridges. We've got wonderful pictures of them, but I want to see the engineering estimates. I want to know the proposals, and if it's valuable and we can save these things and still have them as wonderful symbols, wonderful. The Golden Gate Bridge is a massive piece of infrastructure, but no, we're in a time period where I think there's a lot of public work projects that could take place that are needed. And so if these price tags are exceptional for saving infrastructure that could otherwise be shifted to another route, I think that makes more sense.
And we also have to remember that steel is steel. Concrete does have a lifespan, and it is not. My husband worked for the Caltrans and was on the bridge crew, and he likes to tell me that when he was on the bridge, you could reach out and crumble the cement. And that kind of makes me nervous. He also has shared about, oh, well, they have these really powerful glues that will glue the cement together. Yeah, I'm a teacher. I know how glue works. And finally, I agree, it is a beautiful historic structure, and if it can be preserved as a walkway, that makes a lot of sense to me. But I don't want to be the person that's on the bridge when it collapses. I have to be brutally honest about this. My niece also works for Caltrans, and she had shared that it was costing taxpayers $30,000 a day for just the people to say go and stop. And that is a little high, in my opinion. And finally, I do know that when it was built, it was those wells at the bottom, those bell-shaped, they were filled with sand. Remember the 55 and the 64 flood and the 80 flood and the other floods? They've washed some of that sand out, a lot of that sand out. So again, I have concerns about physical structure integrity. And if the expense is not horrible, yeah, let's save it and let's drive over it and let's enjoy it. It's a beautiful entrance into Ferndale and certainly a part of the whole Ferndale experience. I remember as a little kid, you got to roll down the window so you can hear the wappa, 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 wappa as you go by. And I would want my nephews and grandnephews to have that experience. However, I don't want to be the person on the bridge that falls down.
Are you gearing up for a counterpoint? This is so exciting.
Well, it did survive the 64 flood.
I know.
When
That was 50 years ago.
It was 1911. It was a big decade in our country's history. Susan has a good idea about preserving it, perhaps in some way, and but I think in the end I'd leave it up to the people who live in Ferndale and Lolita and Fernbridge, maybe Fortuna, the people who love it the most. I think I'd listen to those voices first, yeah.
You could almost, Josh probably knows too, you could almost say that about the railroad around the bay and all that controversy and pulling the rails. And, it's sort of the same thing in a lot of ways. It was all transportation. It was a big historical part of our county. And so a lot of people love it and a lot of people don't want it. It becomes a political issue, actually. I don't know, probably not as much as the rails, but yeah, I think when you have something since 1911 that was built and is so much a part of the collective memory of Humboldt, especially the people that live there, you're going to have a lot of people that want to save it. And yeah, you just have to be, I think, a little practical about that as far as the cost-effective value of gluing it back together, as Anne would say. Safety should be the primary goal.
May I say one thing about a little different subject, and that is our President William McKinley statue that went away in Arcata. I really miss him because I went to his home, very modest home in Canton, Ohio. And I guess that's where the statue is wound up. Fortunately, it wasn't destroyed. But I feel like when that happened, there was an awful lot of discussion in the newspapers, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think that what my colleagues here are saying about discussing two sides of an issue is really important. I don't quite know why William McKinley was despised. He was an abolitionist and served in the Union Army in the Civil War, adamantly abolitionist. And then his Secretary of the Interior, the equivalent of the one that we have today that would be in charge of Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Land Management and
Deborah
so on.
Holland.
His Secretary of the Interior was Ethan Allen Hitchcock, who was a lawyer who took strides to defend Indian tribes and to try to settle territorial disputes. And then, I mean, the gold standard is another matter. We don't have time, but I just thought he was a very fine person, and he was a devoted family man. He adored his wife, and judging by the modesty of his home in Canton, Ohio, where he raised his family, it was certainly if he made piles of money somehow, that it certainly wasn't showing in his lifestyle at all. Anyway, I thought he was a fine president and a fine man, and the idea that we despised him for some reason here in Humboldt County made no sense to me. And I was just wondering, I wonder, did anybody actually read his biography? Or how many people did? That's all. Another icon that I miss.
Yeah, I didn't understand that one either.
Yes, there is a lot of information out there about William McKinley's history. So it is about time for us to wrap up. I want to remind everyone to please take the survey. This is how we prove to PBS that we are doing our jobs over here on the North Coast. Katie, in there in the back, has some links and some paperwork for you, so she will help you out. Finally, on the note of symbols, if any of you ever feel bad about yourselves, please remember that the Eiffel Tower was built from scrap metal. What? And could I have a round of applause for my panelists?